Welcome to Kaiser Watch with John Kaiser. I'm your host, Jim Goddard. Welcome back to the show, John.
Jim, it's good to be back on the show. Today we're going to talk about a bunch of bad news developments, but not all of them are bad.
What does President Boric's plan for greater government involvement in Chile's lithium resources mean for Lithium Mania 2.0?
It potentially will give a substantial boost to Lithium Mania 2.0, which is the search for lithium-enriched pegmatite deposits in jurisdictions such as Canada, and continue the development in Australia. Pegmatite is a hard rock source of lithium. Chile itself, its lithium comes from the salars, the brines underneath them, and it was a bad news day for Albemarle and SQM, both of whom have operations in Chile, which recover lithium carbonate from the brines. Gabriel Boric went on television and gave this speech in which he said that government wants to take a much bigger role in the lithium sector. Now, this is kind of ironic because the government already controls the lithium sector, and companies that happen to have mineral title to a salar have to do some sort of lease deal with the government in order to get anything going. But what's happened now is that he still has to get this plan passed by Congress, and his party does not have a majority in Congress. But he's packaged it in a way where it isn't a full nationalization where they just take away everything from existing owners and then attempt to develop it by themselves, such as Bolivia has done with its giant salar, and as Mexico has done with its lithium systems, where, of course, absolutely nothing is happening right now as a consequence. With regard to the Albemarle and SQM operations, those have contracts in place, but he's going to, if he gets approval from Congress, he's going to ask Codelco, which is the national copper company, to negotiate a bigger share for the government from the revenues and profits from the lithium production that Albemarle and SQM have. And that's why SQM, which is predominantly salar brine production, dropped 20% today, and Albemarle dropped about 10%, but it has exposure to Greenbushes and other pegmatite production, and in fact made a tentative offer to acquire Liontown and its Kathleen Valley operation in Australia. So I think this development, because it creates uncertainty about what Chile actually wants to do, will inspire producers to look closer at acquiring and developing pegmatite deposits as a source of lithium supply. Now, some of the issues that may appeal to Congress to support this is right now the lithium production is done by pumping the brine onto large flat areas and letting it evaporate and then scraping the residue and processing it. There's new methods being developed, direct lithium extraction, which are less water intensive. The problem with the evaporation method is the water evaporates, and with the current trends in climate change, that water isn't necessarily coming back as rain in the mountains and back to replenish the salars and other water areas. So water is a huge concern in Chile, and direct lithium extraction technologies are what the government would like to see used more intensively. Now, this is potentially bad news for undeveloped projects because Boric seems to want a majority stake in any projects that get developed. So if ABC Company has a mineral title to a salar and has done the work to show that, the brine is there, it's got the lithium content, it deserves to be developed, instead of having 100% of it and whatever it is that the government used to take and then generating the revenues and paying the taxes. Now we may face a situation where that, yes, they have title, but they will have a minority stake in it and possibly be responsible for 100% of all the costs. And this is what Robert Mugabe created for Zimbabwe more than 20 years ago. He said that the government will own 51% of every project. Foreigners can only have 49%, but the foreigners are responsible for 100% of capex and any losses. So this was basically a free carried interest. It isn't quite clear whether Boric's going to go after a carried majority interest. That remains to be seen. But this was not particularly good news for all these juniors that have projects in Chile. Argentina has gone a separate path. It's a much more laissez-faire path. It's leaving it up to the different provinces to figure out how it's going to be developed. And Argentina has been buzzing. All the companies that have projects there, they are working on them, they're advancing them. So we may see Argentina emerge as the dominant lithium triangle developer. Bolivia, because they own everything and they are landlocked, they've basically been just dealing with the Chinese and the Russians to try and get something done. I'm not sure they will ever get anything done out of the Bolivian salar. And for Chile, there's now some saying that, Chile is going to cease to be the second largest producer of lithium. The others are going to sweep past them. Australia already has, and Argentina may catch up and surpass them. Because the problem is when you have this heavy-handed government ownership of everything, not an awful lot happens. And if they do get it going, it shouldn't affect the global supply of lithium. It will just affect how much money goes into the pockets of the producers who are doing all the work to produce this lithium. So I think regardless of how this shakes out, the producers are going to look harder at the hard rock sources of lithium. And that's where places like Australia and Canada is sort of the emerging version of Australia, where Lithium Mania 2.0 applies. I think they stand to benefit. I don't know how long it will take for Chile to figure out what exactly it is going to do, but this is a bit of a shot in the arm to the producers to get on with identifying pegmatite bodies that are lithium enriched, buy out the better ones and develop them, and make sure the world clearly sees what will be the source of the 600% lithium expansion required to meet the goals of 2030 for EV deployment.
Why did the market react negatively to Brunswick's Anatacau West update?
Well, Brunswick put out a news release saying that it had wrapped up drilling at the Anatacau West project, which is a small claim that it has just to the east of Allchem's Galaxy CYR operation, which it is developing as a lithium mine. And they announced that, we drilled, almost 4,000 meters, and we have intersected 3 sets of on echelon pegmatite dikes. So they kind of strike northeast, southwest, and there's a series of them. Some of them have pretty good widths. They did observe a decent crystal size of spodumene in the core. And of course, this is not going to be a major, CV5 type discovery such as Patriot Battery has with its Corvette project. This was always just understood as low-hanging fruit. It's the eastern extension of the system that Allchem already controls. It's building all the processing infrastructure. Obviously, it's not going to want to mine anything to the east anytime soon. But Brunswick said, well, let's show what it is here. If there is something there, maybe Allchem will pay us some money, $5 million, $10 million, and we could have a non-dilutionary financing, which is always good for a junior at the beginning of an exploration cycle. The company has about $16 million working capital in the treasury, but that can vanish quickly because this company, not only does it have a lot of boots on the ground, field inspections that it'll be doing this year on all the claims that it has picked up after doing archival research last year, but they're also starting a campaign of putting a drill on these properties to assess whether or not the pegmatites are lithium enriched, and if they are, to what extent they are, and are they big enough to be bother doing anything with. So it's kind of like a drill to kill type mission, a process of elimination. So that's going to be very expensive. So in drilling this project while the ground was frozen, because this is a bit of a boggy area, not that fun to work in the summer. They delivered basically good news. Would Allchem just wait them out and say, well, we don't need this for 7-8 years? Well, Brunswick is unlikely to be like a typical rinky-dink ambulance-chasing junior, which in 5 years is when Lithium Mania 2.0 has run its course, will have been rolled back 10, 20 times for one and chasing some brand new flavor of the month, and they can pick up this property cheap. No, Brunswick will very likely become a major success. And when it is a major success, it will be less interested in doing a deal on the extension of this project. So they're willing and eager to do a deal now that's reasonable. So there's a good chance that Anatacau West could end up providing a little bit of an injection of capital into the treasury. But that wasn't the reason the market had a negative reaction. In early April, Brunswick sent a team up to the core shack on the Plex project, which has the core that Virginia Gold and later Virginia Mines drilled in that area, in particular on the Orphe gold zone, which never really became big enough to be worth developing. But they had logged intersection of pegmatite in these holes, pretty wide intersections. Some of them were 75 meters wide. There wasn't much description of the nature of it. And there was an outside chance that perhaps these were spodumene-enriched pegmatites that they had drilled through and weren't interested in, because that was in that sort of 2005 to 2010 period when lithium was still just a $200 million a year market controlled by the Greenbush supply and the brines in Chile. And so we were hoping to hear that when the team went in there, logged this, used their XRF gun, and we would get an announcement saying, this stuff is LCT enriched. It's very promising. We have split the core. We have shipped it for sampling. And the significance of this could be that within 2 months, at the start of the exploration season, sort of early June for the James Bay region, we could already have a discovery just from assaying a portion of core that was never assayed 15 years ago. So when the market didn't hear anything but silence about this, it said, it's probably not very interesting. Maybe it has some potential. It's in sort of that category. Maybe it's not entirely barren, but it's clearly not the sort of thing that they would have bundled with this news release. So I think the stock retreated because, yes, it knows that the Anatacau West thing is not going to take the stock to the moon. It already has a $150 to $200 million fully diluted valuation. But it was hoping a instant gratification from the Plex project. And unless, of course, I'm misreading the way they think about stuff, the Plex project, they'll have to walk the ground in the summer, find out where the more outboard pegmatite bodies are, and do all the work that they were doing last year with some of the other projects. So I did talk to Killian Charles, and he indicated that they are working to mobilize a drill onto the Hearst project in Ontario. This hopefully we get a news release next week that this actually happened. Hearst has about a 65-meter strike exposure, which has spodumene in the surface. It's just a small program, 1,000 meters. But then, we don't know how much of a strike this pegmatite has, or how much of it will end up having spodumene in it. So with 1,000 meters, you could do, a series of 100-meter holes that could very quickly delineate this. Again, this is part of the process of elimination strategy. But in talking to Killian, what was really interesting is how excited he is about the Hanson Lake project that they picked up from Searchlight in late January. This is in Saskatchewan, and these were pegmatites that were documented ages ago, which is why Searchlight owned them in the first place. They plan to be on the property in early May, and perhaps drilling already in May, because the government documents from all the various government geologists and that show, some of these do have spodumene in it. They've never been systematically assessed nor drilled. So they see this because some of these pegmatite dike bodies are pretty extensive in the Hansen Lake area. They think this could be a very fast track to establishing, wow, this is actually really something. So that's the hope for, beyond the Hearst project coming up. The big hope for the company is that Hansen Lake turns into a big surprise and puts Saskatchewan properly on the lithium pegmatite map.
What did NioBay's initial results for Crevier reveal?
Well, NioBay's stock price collapsed into the 10 to 12 cent range on Thursday when the news came out, which included results for the first three holes. Hole number 1, which was drilled near the main zone, it came out with the sort of 0.15, close to 0.2% niobium pentoxide grades that are typical for the main zone, but we don't really care about the main zone because the grade for the niobium tantalum is really just too low to be of commercial interest at the prices that we have right now. What the market reacted negatively to was the assays for hole 6, which was the wildcat hole that the company drilled last fall underneath Lac Tulare, which is a lake to the west of the main zone. It's several kilometers to the west. The area between Lac Tulare and the main zone, which is a late-stage nepheline cyanide dike that runs for several kilometers and has 40 million tons of mineralization in it. The area between had been clear-cut logged recently, and so all of a sudden this whole area was accessible. And when they drilled hole number 6 under Lac Tulare, J.S. David was stunned that they actually intersected a giant interval of carbonatite. Now, carbonatite is the host for the NioBay mine, about 75 or 150 kilometers to the southeast at Saguenay, and that's a world-class deposit, and it sort of runs between 0.4 and 0.6% niobium, and it's now at basically it's underground mine, and the hope was that maybe here was something similar, but basically starting at the bottom of the lake. And because carbonatite is a softer material, it weathers recessively, whereas nepheline cyanide is similar to pegmatite. It's a very hard material, which is why you often see it outcropping and existing as ridges, and it's easy to walk on, and the trees don't tend to grow on it, and there's no mosquitoes. Whereas back on the shores of Lac Tulare, it would have been pretty bushy and full of mosquitoes. So the hope was, in fact, J.S. David was so excited about this that he even got a thin section study done because he thought he'd seen some pyrochlorid crystals in it, and the study confirmed, yes, there are niobium minerals present in this rock. And so we were hoping to get 0.3% or better grades, but instead, all we got was a few 1 meter intervals of like 0.1%, which is, even lower than the main zone. And there was a 0.1 to 0.2% rare earth content, which is kind of what you expect from a carbonatite. But even that's about a 10th or 20th of what it needs to be of commercial interest. So the market saw that, the CEO who's been buying stocks since mid-February in the open market, obviously he was expecting something very different. And in fact, in mid-February, they had got results for some of the holes, but they were all over the map and apparently included even quite high grades, except that they didn't really match with the visuals, and they figured something was wrong, so they had them all redone. And when they came back, it's like, not very much niobium in there at all. And there had been plans to do a summer drill program. There had done a benefits agreement with the local First Nations group to be supportive of drilling a lot more holes under Lac Tulare. But with only $4.5 million worth of working capital left, I have a suspicion the board's going to look at this and say, Yeah, there might be some zones of enrichment within this very large, 500 million ton body of carbonatite, but I don't think that is the best use for our money. So the stock tanked, and now it's back to where it was late last year, waiting for some sort of breakthrough with the NioBay project. That breakthrough could come in late June. There is a general election happening to elect a chief and 12 tribal councillors for the next 4 years. The current chief, Marvin Chichu, he is running, and he's got one candidate running against him. He allowed a survey to happen a couple of years ago that was pretty much an informal survey which asked whether or not people supported NioBay being developed, and they managed to get more votes against development than for it. And so NioBay suspended the drill program that they had underway because they really don't want to pursue anything in this area without the Moosonee, the Moose Cree First Nation people behind development of this, because this is going to be in their backyard. It's going to employ their people. If they don't want it, well, nothing's ever going to happen. And so the stock had cratered a couple of years ago when it became clear that the anti-mining lobby was still powerfully influential in Moosonee. This election, it could turn it around if we get a different a chief who's more supportive of development, and they can get seven tribal councillor members who are supportive of development in the community. Things could turn around, and that's what stock's sunk now back to 10-12 cents level, where it's kind of a long shot speculation that the people of Moosonee will end up supporting a commercial activity in their backyard that's going to be fairly long-lived and which could inject a different type of meaning into their community beyond the sort of hunting, fishing, and type of trapping activities that currently sustains them. So we'll have to wait and see how this election works out. Hopefully it works out with a group in power that's supportive of development. But until it does, NioBay seems to be back to being a bottom fish rather than a potential new discovery play based on a niobium-enriched carbonatite at the Crevier project.
What caused Tower's stock price to plunge 2/3 this week?
When Tower Resources released the results for hole 42 on April 20th, on Thursday, the stock dropped 2/3 and down into the sort of 11 to 13 cents on very heavy volume. And to me, that struck me as extremely irrational. But the problem was all the sort of pumping that had been going on in social media circles was based on the story that emerged on March 1st when they put out the first news release, which was that the Thunder Zone was a orogenic gold-type system. It's parallel to the Lightning Zone that they explored last year. It appeared to have more intensive sulfide mineralization. It even had a few specks of visible gold to support expectations that there would be gold in this system. It was supported by a pretty good gold and till anomaly with coarser grains than the ones that are in the Dominic train. And so the hope was that we have this shear structure that runs sort of north-south, and who knows how wide it's going to be. Part of the initial description said that it seems to be blossoming at depth, and sulfide intensity is increasing. But this hole number 42, had no interesting gold intervals in it whatsoever. And a couple of weeks ago, on April 6th, I did a Kaiser Watch episode in which I discussed the results of hole 41, which I had talked to Stu Averill about, and we sort of tried to figure out what does this mean. Hole 41 had not quite delivered the sort of grades and intervals that the market may have been expecting, but with the hole 42, which was a 65-degree angle that undercut hole 41 and was the most likely one where there was this 130-meter interval of very interesting mineralization. My expectation was that, this hopefully shows up deeper down beneath this higher level thunder zone intersection, and we do see the gold grade blossom. Well, in the new section published by Tower, they now interpret the thunder zone, rather than being a subvertical shear structure, it's now dipping 70 degrees or so to the east, which means that a 65-degree hole would have stayed parallel with the mineralized zone. And instead of getting any sort of gold mineralization, they had lots of pyrite in the core. That was the basis for everybody getting excited in the first place. But there were only a few sort of copper, moly, gold intervals within that, not particularly high grade. And this, of course, is linked to the 210 million year old porphyry system that developed back then, rather than the sort of 149 million year old orogenic system which came in. And in the discussion, the press release discussion, Stu Averill said that it's now clear that the orogenic gold-enriched mineralization is not present when there is also copper sulfides present. And this had been the sort of confusing thing, because in the description it said that evidence of copper was improving at depth, and that didn't make a lot of sense. And when I talked to Stu in March about it, he was dismissive of the copper potential, because that was the older system. The orogenic system would have been an overprint that brings in a new fluid loaded up with gold, and that's what the real goal was to find this gold system. But when I talked to him after the April 5th news release, his attitude had changed on the copper potential, and the reason was the rainbow zone. Now, just before they got into the thunder zone with hole 41, they had an interval of that was 36 meters of 0.19% copper and 0.34 grams per ton gold, and a trace of molybdenum. And this started just beneath a veneer of basalt, and underneath that was a saprolite, a not very thick saprolite horizon, and then started this rainbow zone, which looks like a classic porphyry type system. And this was a big surprise, because they weren't expecting this. And what's really interesting about hole 42, basically in the same location except deeper and starting at the same vertical depth of about 50 meters, it yielded 72.4 meters of 0.27% copper and 0.4 gram per ton gold, and even a slightly higher moly grade than the higher up interval from hole 41. And although watching the thunder zone shrink to a much narrower structure based on the angle of intersection and the new interpretation of the dip, that the thunder zone is now a relatively small scale story for this project. But this rainbow zone is starting to look very interesting. And when Stu and I discussed this, I was looking at the map, and it says, it's all mapped as these volcanics, you're thinking that there's maybe a porphyry system to the west, and yet you go through this veneer of basalt. Maybe there's a huge laterally extensive cover of basalt all to the west of this. And historically, in 50 years, there's been lots of exploration done on the Durand stock, but it's been mostly on the northern flank of it and within it itself. But to the west, there's been very little activity, because when you walk the ground and do geochemical surveys, you don't get very much. And where there is outcrop, it wasn't very interesting. So the explorationists never really had a reason to look hard in this direction. And as Stu notes, there's so much sulfide in the system, and anomalous copper and gold that's clearly linked to the older porphyry system. It's all over the place. And if there is this basalt, and in their latest geology map, they now show the brown basalt cover being the bedrock rock to the west of the central train where the thunder zone is located. It's possible now that there is a very substantial copper gold system similar to Afton that extends to the west, on the western flank of the Durand stock, where there's never been any work. So I think the market's reaction, just totally bailing out just because the orogenic story has not worked out, I think it's completely overdone. And I see this now as an opportunity for bottom fishers to come in and get a position in a story, an emerging new discovery, where off to the west is a very big gold-copper system. And some of the things Stu has said is that, like looking at all the various temperatures and relationships of elements and that, they're really on the edge of something. And of course, we don't know what the orientation of the system is, whether it's turned over or whatever. But I have a suspicion that when they start marching west, they're going to reveal a major new copper-gold discovery, and it's going to be relatively shallow. So you strip away the 50 meters of overburden and basalt, and then away you go. You have a brand new discovery in an excellent location. So market reaction overdone. But I think it's because there was so much high expectation for a orogenic, medium to high grade gold discovery. And the market said, oh, this is like last year, the lightning zone. It looks interesting in the beginning, but then it fizzles. But I think this time around, as a byproduct of pursuing the Thunder Zone and the central, as the source of the central train, I think they may have discovered something that could turn this company into a great success story.
John, thank you so much for the update.
You're welcome, Jim.
I'm Jim Goddard. Comments made on Kaiser Watch are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any manner whatsoever as a recommendation to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Archived online at kaiserresearch.com.